They popped the champagne like it was a coronation. Laughter danced under white and gold banners, cameras flashed, and a brass band bellowed from a rented stage. Everyone clapped, grinned, toasted. Everyone but me. I stood there on the edge of the crowd, smile frozen like a man at his own funeral. Not because I was proud of what they'd built. God, no. I smiled because 7 months from that exact moment, I was going to sell this lake, my lake, right out from under them, for more money than any of them could imagine. And they wouldn't even see it coming. You ever watch a man celebrate on the deck of a ship that's already sinking? That's what it felt like. That was sunny shores. But to understand what brought me there, you have to start long before the streamers and the speeches, before the dock renovations and the golf carts and the private marina. You have to go back to a quieter time, a different life. When I first laid eyes on Maplewood Lake, I didn't think it would change mine. I wasn't planning on buying land. I was just driving. A detour, really. One of those half-lost Sunday loops you take when the city's too loud and your bones are too tired. The gravel road was unmarked. The trees crowded in close, and the air smelled like pine and old promises. I was almost past it when I saw the water. And then I stopped breathing. There's a kind of stillness some places have. Not silence. Not absence. Stillness. The lake had it. It lay there like a secret too beautiful to say aloud. Soft ripples shimmering under a sky washed in watercolor, ringed by woods so thick you'd swear they hadn't changed since the first men walked through them with muskets and dreams. A few old docks slumped into the shore like sleeping dogs. There was a shack, too, faded wood, moss curling along the roofline, the whole thing leaning slightly like it might fall over if you sneezed. But the light hit the surface just so, and in that moment, I knew I'd spend the rest of my life here if I could. 30 years of work had led to that moment. Brown bag lunches, skipped vacations, back-to-back shifts when I was the only one who'd say yes to the holidays no one wanted. I didn't have kids. Never married. Didn't regret it. My life had been quiet, steady, practical. But deep down, I'd been saving for something. Not a thing, exactly. A feeling. That feeling. That moment by the lake. I found the number scribbled on a warped for sale sign nailed to a pine tree, and called it right there from the hood of my car. The man who answered was named Ed Whitaker. Ed was older than the trees, or at least looked it. Sun-creased skin, fingers like old rope, a voice slow as syrup. He told me he'd fished that lake with his father, back before the war. The big war. He didn't ask why I wanted it. Didn't sell it hard. He just said, if you respect it, it'll respect you right back. That was the only rule. We shook on it in the dust, just 2 men and a piece of land. No mortgage. No banks. No HOA. Just a transfer, quiet and clean. I signed the deed, handed over the check, and felt my whole body exhale for the first time in decades. You ever feel land claim you? Not the other way around. I didn't own that lake. It owned me. My plot wasn't much, barely an acre, with a narrow ribbon of shoreline and that lopsided old shack. The dock creaked like a tired man's knees. But it was mine. No one stomping upstairs at 2 a.m. No car alarms. No light pollution. Just wind, water, and the occasional hoot of an owl like some distant memory calling home. The first few months were magic. I'd wake before dawn, paddle out in a rusted canoe I patched with duct tape and good intentions, and sit in the mist until the sun bled gold across the water. I cleared brush, chopped wood, watched the stars like they were old friends. The neighbors, if you could call them that, were like ghosts, quiet, nodding from porches but mostly keeping to themselves. Mostly old-timers like Ed. The lake had a rhythm, and I was learning the beat. I didn't need much. A hot plate, a shortwave radio, a stack of old paperbacks. Peace, that was the real treasure. Peace you could feel in your teeth. Peace so quiet it made you cry just a little. But then like oil on clear water it began. A rumble of tires on gravel. The smell of fresh asphalt and fake citrus from new car interiors. SUVs too shiny for dirt roads. At first I thought someone got lost. Then 2 more came. Then 5. Contractors hammered day and night. Trees fell like dominoes. Cabins turned into houses. Houses turned into mini-mansions. Stone facades, infinity decks, full outdoor kitchens. Always louder, always closer to the shore. Like the lake was a prize to be captured, not a home to be honored. The new people wore yoga pants and Bluetooth headsets. They waved too big, smiled too wide, always mid-conversation about markets and margins. And they all kept saying the same thing. How lucky they were to discover such an untouched place. How amazing it was to build community from the ground up. As if the ground hadn't been here long before them. One day, a glossy brochure showed up in my mailbox. Full-color renderings. Trees photoshopped greener than life. A name I hadn't heard before, Sunny Shores. It talked about preservation, shared stewardship, elevating the lakeside experience. Buried deep in the cheerful legalese was the real bomb, a proposal for a new HOA. Sunny Shores Homeowners Association. Mandatory dues. architectural guidelines, voting weighted by property size. And this is where my blood froze. The lake itself would become common property under the management of the HOA. I laughed out loud. I mean, how could they? How could you declare a natural lake common property with a few signatures and a logo? My deed said nothing about shared anything. Neither did Ed's. I called some of the old-timers. Most hadn't heard of it. A few shrugged. They won't get far with that nonsense, one said. Ain't legal. But I'd seen that look before. Resignation. Exhaustion. Like they'd already been steamrolled, and figured it wasn't worth the fight. 2 weeks later, I got my welcome to Sunny Shores packet. Inside, a schedule of dues, a rule book, and a cheery letter informing me that my participation was both expected and appreciated. I threw it in the wood stove and watched it curl black. But I have to ask you because you're still watching, right? Maybe you clicked because of the title. Maybe you're here for revenge, or for the money twist. But ask yourself, where would you have drawn the line? At the first bulldozer? The first fine? The first stranger with blueprints on your porch? Because for me, the line was already under my feet. The land, the lake, the memory of a handshake between two men who respected the quiet. And I wasn't about to let that be paved over with brochures and buzzwords. Not without a fight. Not without a plan. Not without making sure that when the hammer finally dropped, it would land squarely on the smug, grinning face of every last one of them. And it all started here. With the lake. With Ed. With 1 acre of stubborn land and one man who refused to be moved. They didn't come all at once. That's the mistake people make when they tell stories like this. They imagine some sudden invasion, like the sky cracked open and 1,000 Range Rovers fell from it. But no, they trickled in like rain through a leaky roof. First one, then another, then a dozen more, each family carrying the quiet arrogance of people who believe they're building a better world simply by showing up. I remember the first new neighbor who stopped to introduce herself. Her name was something double-barreled and breathy. Claire Ann or Ann Claire, I never could remember. She wore a white tennis skirt and carried a little dog that shook like a leaf and smelled like perfume. She said they were so thrilled to join the community and that they were already working with Bradley on something exciting. She said that name like I was supposed to know it. I didn't. Not yet. But I would. The trucks kept coming. Not just pickups and moving vans, but flatbeds, cement mixers, lumber rigs. They rolled down our gravel lanes like invaders in a war that hadn't been declared. New foundations poured into old earth. The sounds changed too. The lake used to hum, now it buzzed. Nail guns and circular saws became the new bird song. The deer stopped coming. The otters vanished. I couldn't hear the loons anymore over the generators and shouting foremen. And then one morning, I saw something I hadn't seen before, surveying flags. Bright pink, planted in a neat line that ran right up to the edge of my property. When I followed the flags to their source, I found a group of men in neon vests and clipboards talking in circles. One of them wore sunglasses on a cloudy day and introduced himself as Development Oversight. He pointed toward the eastern ridge, past the Cedar Grove, and said something about an eco-conscious wellness lodge. I asked who had approved this. He smiled like I'd just asked who invented Tuesdays and said, "Oh, the HOA's got full project authority now. You'd have to take it up with Bradley." There was that name again. I met Bradley Keene the same way you meet a skunk in your crawl space, suddenly, unpleasantly, and with a lingering smell you can't quite get rid of. He showed up at the so-called community forum they held in the refurbished town hall, a place that used to host potlucks and now had a mounted flat screen and catered pastries. Bradley had the look of a man who'd never once been told no and believed he never would be. Like he slept in a tanning bed. Hair too neat. Teeth too white. He spoke like a TED Talk filtered through a real estate seminar. He welcomed us to a bold new chapter in Maplewood's legacy. He talked about vision, amenities, harmonization. I sat in the back, arms crossed, and watched my neighbors nod along like cattle lining up for the slaughterhouse. He said the HOA would be installing a lakeside yoga deck, a floating dock system, and a shared lawn area near the East Bank. He called it a value multiplier. I called it theft, because the East Bank was my shoreline, my dock, my shack, my trees. I raised my hand to object, but they'd already moved on to discussion about exterior paint color palettes. I left early. Outside, the night air smelled like cut grass and construction dust. The stars were still there, but you had to squint to see them through the light pollution of a temporary floodlight someone had mounted near the new parking area. Days later, construction crews arrived on my land. Not near it, on it. They didn't knock. Didn't ask. Just parked their trucks, unloaded lumber and tools, and started marking where to dig. I confronted them, of course. One of them, a kid barely out of puberty, looked confused and said they had permits. I asked to see them. He shrugged. Said to call Bradley. I did. Left 3 voicemails. Got nothing. The next day there was a sign on my lawn, future site of Sunny Shores Picnic Pavilion. Beneath it, in smaller text, Private HOA project members only. I drove to the county clerk's office. Waited in line behind someone trying to get a dog license. Finally spoke to a clerk who looked at my deed, and then at a screen and said, "Looks like you're now part of Parcel Group D Shoreline Cooperative Zone." I asked what that meant. She shrugged. Said I'd have to take it up with the HOA. So I did. I walked into their new welcome center, an air-conditioned trailer parked at the edge of what used to be a birch grove, and was greeted by a woman named Riley who looked like she'd been manufactured in a lab to soothe angry people. Soft voice, big eyes, rehearsed empathy. I asked how they had the right to build on my land. She said, according to the updated shoreline usage agreement outlined in the Sunny Shores Charter, approved by supermajority vote, all adjacent properties are now considered community enhancement zones. I stared at her. You mean my yard is now a public park? She smiled. Think of it more like shared stewardship. I asked who gave them permission to step foot on my property. She blinked once, then said, "You'll need to direct legal questions to our compliance department." That night I found a fine taped to my door. Blue painter's tape. $500. Failure to maintain shoreline vegetation to HOA standards. I stood there on my porch, the paper crumpling in my hand, the lake behind me glowing orange from the construction lights across the water. Somewhere, a band was playing covers of 80s pop songs at full volume. The next day, I got another fine. Then another. Fence too short. Mailbox not in aesthetic alignment. A log pile deemed disorderly. One week I got cited for having a canoe on the lawn. Another week, for refusing to allow an HOA inspector onto my deck. The inspector in question had let himself in while I was chopping wood. I heard him taking photos, and came around the corner to find him measuring my window trim with a laser tool. He smiled and said he was just checking compliance. I tried reasoning. I tried writing letters. I even showed up at a neighborhood meeting with photos, documents, and a folder full of highlighted sections from my original deed. Bradley listened with the expression of a man humoring a lunatic. When I finished, he stood, clapped me on the back, and said, "You're passionate. I respect that, but you're thinking too small. This isn't about you. This is about the future of Maplewood." He turned to the crowd. "Do we want to be stuck in the past, or do we want to move forward together?" The room applauded. I left before they passed the resolution authorizing a fitness trail to run across the back edge of my property. One morning I found a family setting up a picnic on my dock. They waved like I was the one trespassing. A teenage boy tossed a football into the water and yelled, "Catch it, Grandpa!" I went back inside. The next day there were bike tire tracks across my garden. A week later, someone set up a hammock between two of my pines. I cut it down and left it on the HOA office porch. The following day, I got hit with a willful destruction of shared property fine, $250. But it wasn't just the land they wanted. It was the narrative, the story. Every HOA newsletter was filled with glossy photos and breathless captions. Community in action, a new chapter for Maplewood, neighbors building dreams. I was never mentioned by name, but I became a ghost in my own story. The crank, the loner, the relic. People crossed the street to avoid me. A woman clutched her purse when I walked by. Children whispered when I appeared at the mailbox. Some days I thought about giving in, selling out, taking whatever lowball offer they'd slide under my door, and disappearing to some quieter place. But quieter places are disappearing. And besides, this one had been mine. Still was. Still could be. If I could just figure out how to push back without being drowned in paperwork and platitudes. I spent my nights rereading the deed, comparing survey maps, Googling legal terms until my eyes blurred. I stopped sleeping, stopped paddling, stopped smiling, but I started documenting. Every fine, every trespass, every photo, every video clip. I printed emails, recorded calls, bought a new drone, started building a file thick enough to be heard in a courtroom. Not because I wanted a fight, but because they had already started one. They just didn't realize I was fighting back yet. And through it all, the lake stayed quiet. Not silent, but quiet. As if it was waiting, watching, letting the storm roll through, so it could see who would still be standing when the dust cleared. I intended to be that person. Not because I wanted revenge. Not yet. But because this lake had given me peace once. And now, I owed it something in return. I didn't find the covenant. The covenant found me. But before that, before the cracked leather folder and the ink that looked like it had been scratched down by candlelight, there were weeks of silence, of stillness so absolute it felt like the lake had gone into mourning. I wasn't mourning, not exactly. I was sharpening. I was watching. There comes a point in every long war when the noise dies down just enough for the real planning to begin, and that was where I was. The HOA had stopped trying to find me into submission. Maybe they figured I was broke or broken. Maybe they thought I'd finally accepted my place in the background, a decorative eccentric in their lakeside fairy tale. I let them think that. I smiled when they waved. I picked up the trash left on my dock after their wine cruises. I even attended an HOA barbecue, where I stood next to a propane grill and listened to a man in salmon-colored shorts explain how he'd optimized his tax exposure using Delaware LLCs. I nodded a lot. I asked dumb questions. I laughed at jokes. I played the fool. All the while I was gathering evidence, yes, but also strength. Patience. I had never been a patient man before all this. The lake had changed that. The lake had taught me what it meant to outlast things. Weather. Fire. People. Pressure. It was an early afternoon in October when I met James Hawthorne. Not the kind of day that announces itself. Gray light, wet leaves, the smell of slow decay. I found his name scribbled on a note thumbtacked to the back bulletin board in the county records office. Property disputes ask for James. I called the number and left a voicemail. He called back less than an hour later, voice like gravel and bourbon. You said HOA? He asked. I said yes. He asked how much land. I said 1 acre, but it's not about the size. He chuckled and said, it never is. We met the next morning in a strip mall office behind a shuttered optometrist. His suit was rumpled. His tie had a stain shaped like West Virginia. He looked like a man who lived off beef jerky and contempt. I liked him immediately. I handed him the folder I'd built. Photos, fines, maps, emails, letters. I watched him flip through each one with slow precision, his lips barely moving as he read. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and said, they messed up. That's it. No speech, no outrage. Just that, they messed up. I asked what he meant. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a county zoning atlas the size of a tombstone. When people build fast, he said, they skip steps. They assume authority that isn't theirs. And they leave fingerprints. What followed were 3 weeks of research, so deep it felt like we were digging up a graveyard. James went through township records from before the Civil War. He pulled tax ledgers and handwritten maps. He contacted a woman in Vermont who'd archived land transfers from the original settler families. And then, on a rainy Thursday, he called me. Get over here. I found something. The folder was thick, yellowed with time, the corners chewed by mice or history. Inside was a land covenant dated 1897, signed by descendants of the original founders of Maplewood Township. I could barely read the handwriting. It looked more like art than language. But James read it aloud, slowly, reverently, like scripture. The covenant specified that the strip of land running from Whitaker's Bend to Cedar Hollow, my strip, held exclusive rights to the eastern lakefront and its access, including mineral and commercial usage. Not joint rights. Exclusive. It was designed to protect fishing families from logging companies, James said, but the legal language was still valid. Never revoked. Never amended. Never challenged. I stared at the page for a long time. So what does that mean? I asked. James looked up at me, eyes sharp beneath the weight of his years. It means the HOA built their empire on land they don't control. And if we time this right, we won't just beat them. We'll own them. He said it calmly. No gloating. Just fact. I felt the heat rise in my chest, not anger, not even joy. Something colder. Power. The kind of power that doesn't need to shout. The kind that waits, coiled and quiet, until the moment it's needed. James tapped the paper again. We don't move yet. Let them finish. Let them spend. Let them drown in their own ambition. The waiting was the hardest part. Watching them build, expand, advertise. Watching the resort rise like a tumor on the edge of the water, all faux rustic timber and imported Italian stone. They hosted hard hat tours for investors. Gave interviews about redefining community. One night, a drone show lit up the sky over the lake. Another night, they projected their logo onto the surface of the water with lasers, as if they could brand the lake like cattle. I recorded it all. James told me to. Every unauthorized event, every unpermitted expansion, every inch of shoreline they altered was another nail in their own coffin. I kept the drone flying. I bought a trail cam. I installed security lights and motion sensors, not for protection, just documentation. I cataloged violations like a museum curator. And all the while they kept smiling, kept selling, kept dancing toward their own oblivion. Then came the weddings. The concerts. The branded wine cruises with names like Sunset Sips and Jazz on the Water. People parked on my land. They picnicked on my dock. One group filmed a promotional video using my shack as a backdrop, never once asking permission. I watched the footage online later and almost laughed. They called it heritage chic. They called me part of the charm. I was background noise in my own story. But I didn't crack. I didn't yell. I didn't confront. I waited. And finally, when every piece was in place, when their calendar was booked, their loans spent, their investors fat and smug and deep in denial, I gave James the signal. He filed everything at once. Quiet title action. Injunctions. Cease and desist orders. Challenges to every permit, every commercial license, every dock that touched the water. We dropped it like a thunderclap. And the silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd heard since the last loon call before the bulldozers came. The press got wind of it within days. First a small article in the local paper, cautious and dry. Then a regional news station ran a segment titled Legal Storm Brewing at Sunny Shores. Within a week, real estate blogs were buzzing. Investors started asking questions. People who'd paid deposits on summer homes called their agents in a panic. HOA board members started resigning. Bradley went into damage control. I watched him hold a press conference in front of the Welcome Center, tie crooked, voice strained, insisting everything was just a misunderstanding. But the cracks were spreading. And the lake, my lake, had started to go quiet again. We didn't ask for damages. We didn't demand back pay. We made one simple offer: buy it all. The land, the access, the rights. And not at a discount. At full market panic. Bidding wars broke out in boardrooms. Private equity firms circled like sharks. The number climbed fast. 7 figures. Then 8. The final offer came in a simple manila envelope delivered by courier. I opened it on my porch, coffee in hand, the sunrise staining the lake gold. I read the number twice. Then a third time. Then I laughed. And in that laugh, there was no bitterness. No revenge. Just release. Because they never saw it coming. They thought I was old. Alone. Beaten. But I had the one thing they couldn't buy, couldn't replicate, couldn't pave over with charm and logos. I had the deed. I had the covenant. I had the time. And I used every second of it. I signed the papers in James' office, under flickering fluorescent lights and the gaze of a notary who looked like she'd seen a ghost. When the wire transfer hit my account, I didn't call anyone. I didn't celebrate. I just walked outside, got in my canoe and drifted. Not to think. Not to plan. Just to be. Because the war was over. And I had won. Not with noise. Not with rage. But with silence. With stillness. With the lake. The moment the ink dried, everything changed, just not for me. For them. The Sunny Shores board, the investors, the glossy poloed visionaries who had laughed behind soft smiles and stiff cocktails. They were the ones now standing on ground they didn't legally control, their million-dollar mirage poised on the edge of legal collapse. I didn't have to say a word. The filings did it for me. James was surgical. Every document landed like a guillotine, clean and final. Quiet title actions. Commercial injunctions. Cease and desist letters that didn't ask, they ordered. Sent by certified courier, stamped with so much legal authority it made mailboxes tremble. In 1 week, the resort transformed from the crown jewel of the county into a house of cards built on swamp air. You could feel the fear ripple outward. First came the whispers, panicked board members meeting behind closed doors, attorneys flown in from New York and LA, press releases rushed out with forced optimism. Then came the scramble, last-minute inspections, title re-verifications, desperate emails sent at midnight with subject lines like urgent, property access, and immediate response required. But no response would save them. The covenant was real. The courts recognized it, and the man who held its rights wasn't budging. I stayed quiet. I didn't gloat. I didn't attend the HOA emergency meetings, now held in conference rooms instead of community spaces. But I watched. Every cancellation email. Every deflated investor interview. Every quiet delisting on real estate websites as homes around the lake vanished from the market, tagged temporarily off market or sale suspended. Behind the scenes, I had James and a team of property specialists working full throttle, auditing every inch of lakefront development, every retroactive permit, every zoning waiver the HOA had manipulated under the table. They uncovered vote records that never matched signatures, contracts awarded to relatives, minutes edited after the fact. It was a slow unraveling, a rot from within, but rot always spreads, and now the stench was rising. Still, Bradley didn't stop. I'll give him credit, he was delusional with style. A man like that doesn't back down easily, not when the cameras are still rolling. So he doubled down. Hosted a charity regatta for lake access equity. Released a new brochure for the resort, this time focusing on digital detox retreats and wellness-centered community immersion. They updated the website, posted drone shots with captions like "A new chapter begins." I watched it all like a man reading his enemy's diary. And I documented every word, every screenshot, every timestamp. Because the more they said, the deeper they dug. They were operating commercial events on water they didn't have the rights to use. Every champagne toast was another nail. Every kayak rental, every lakeside yoga session with matching mats and mimosas, they were evidence now. They just didn't know it yet. The first true cracks showed up in the summer. Wedding cancellations. Not just 1 or 2 dozens. Brides demanding refunds. Vendors pulling out. The event center sat half-booked, a cavernous monument to hubris. I passed by one evening and saw the lights still on but the chairs stacked, candles unlit, tables dressed but untouched. It looked like a party everyone forgot to show up for. A week later, a local news anchor ran a segment titled Sunny Shore's Legal Limbo. They tried to paint both sides, but the damage was done. Public opinion shifted overnight. Suddenly, I wasn't the stubborn old man. I was the guy who owned the lake. And they weren't visionary developers anymore. They were interlopers, opportunists who thought paperwork didn't apply to them. The comments online said it all. People were angry not at me, but at the idea that someone could be so arrogant, so reckless, as to gamble millions on land they never truly understood. Then came the money. Real money. Not from the HOA. They were broke in everything but pretense. It came from outside. A national resort conglomerate, the kind whose name sounds like a luxury soap brand, but whose lawyers bite like wolves. They saw what I saw. Not just a lake. A gateway. A monopoly. A crown jewel in the rough, choked by amateurs. They reached out with subtlety at first. Anonymous inquiries, backdoor phone calls, smile-draped NDAs. James handled it all. Negotiated with the grace of a surgeon and the cruelty of a man who's lost before and won't again. The numbers grew. Offers escalated. 8 figures wasn't the ceiling. It was the floor. The HOA meanwhile flailed. They tried to sue, of course. Claimed the covenant was outdated, that my ownership was invalid, that our sale was fraudulent. It was laughable. Desperate. Like trying to pull a drowning man from quicksand by throwing him more sand. Their suit opened the door to discovery, and James kicked that door wide open. Depositions revealed backroom deals, shady transfers, rushed permits signed without quorum. One former board member flipped fast. Emails leaked, threads where they joked about manipulating regulations, called the old owners dead weight, and referred to me charmingly as the troll with the dock. I printed that one out and pinned it above my coffee maker. The press had a field day. Headlines went from HOA faces lawsuit to HOA faces collapse to Sunny Shores, a paradise in ruin. Residents panicked. Home values crashed. Mortgages failed. One bank froze lending to the entire development. Contractors pulled out. The marina shut down, leaving half-finished docks jutting into the lake like broken fingers. Someone spray-painted "Who Owns the Shore" on the community center wall in dripping black paint. A week later, that same wall was torn down. Renovations, they claimed. More like erasure. I watched it all from my porch. The same porch where I once sat wondering if I'd lost. Now I sat with a ledger of victories growing by the day. And still I kept quiet, because the final blow hadn't landed yet. The final blow would be silent. A wire transfer. A set of keys. A press release with no exclamation points, just facts. And then it came. The conglomerate closed the deal. I signed the final paperwork under the low hum of a bank vault air system, James nodding beside me. And just like that, the lake changed hands. Not theirs. Ours. Within 24 hours, their world froze. Every dock operation, every rental business, every event scheduled on the water, shut down. Cease and desist letters rolled out like thunder. The event center? Bookings void. Marina? Locked. Wine cruises? Cancelled mid-voyage. Brides cried. Board members screamed. Bradley disappeared. Rumor said he left the county. Another said he tried to sell his mansion and found no buyers. No one wanted a front-row seat to a legal implosion. The new owners didn't waste time. They swept in like a cleanup crew after a riot, bought what was salvageable, leveled what wasn't. The event center was stripped, then sold for parts. The fake beach was bulldozed. The wine cellar repurposed into storage. No sentiment, just business. And the lake? It was quiet again. Not silent, not yet. But getting there. The woods began to grow back. The geese returned. The otters, cautious at first, found their way home. I took my canoe out one morning and saw minnows darting in the shallows where beer cans used to float. The air smelled like pine again. The lake was healing. And me? I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. Victory had come slow, like a glacier carving through rock, inevitable, patient, devastating. I'd won not with fury but with endurance. Not by shouting but by waiting. By knowing what was mine and refusing to let them forget it. That was the thing they never understood. You can't build a kingdom on stolen earth. Not forever. The land remembers. The lake remembers. And if you listen, if you truly listen, it'll tell you when to fight. And when to wait. There was no ceremony. No final act of defiance. No camera crews to capture a broken king's retreat. No champagne-soaked surrender. Just silence. One day the signs were gone. The Sunny Shores banners, the glossy maps pinned to kiosks, the QR codes linking to retreat packages and summer concert lineups, all vanished. Like the dream had woken up and realized it had been a nightmare all along. I woke that morning to birdsong I hadn't heard in over a year. Real birds, not recordings from their eco-ambience, sound loops piped through hidden speakers along the marina. The lake was still. Not like before a storm. Still like something had ended. Or maybe, finally, something had begun. Bradley Keene's house went dark first. Once a centerpiece, It sat high on the northern ridge with panoramic views and a rooftop deck where guests once drank Chardonnay and made toasts to legacy and vision. Now the blinds were shut. The yard overgrown. The infinity pool empty, cracked, reflecting nothing but sky. Word spread that he had sold the place at a catastrophic loss, left town in the middle of the night, and was living out of a suite in a mid-tier hotel 3 states away, peddling some new vertical living utopia to anyone naive enough to answer his calls. Most of the other board members followed. Some declared bankruptcy. Others tried to sue their way into relevance, but their paperwork crumbled just like their reputation. You can't reclaim a throne when the kingdom itself has burned. I didn't celebrate. There was no bottle popped on my porch, no revenge speech shouted across the water. What would be the point? They weren't the enemy anymore. They were gone, and the wreckage they left behind wasn't mine to clean. The new owners, the real owners now, had a plan. They weren't developers. They were restorers. Not out of love, maybe, but precision. Profitable precision. They understood the long game better than Bradley ever could. Their crews arrived quietly, like conservationists with clipboards and drone surveys. They studied, measured, waited. Then they struck, not with bulldozers, but with removal orders and cleanup crews. Anything that didn't belong was stripped away. The fake palm trees lining the beachfront relaxation zone were uprooted and carted off. The hollow statue of a Native American chief, installed without irony as a decorative tribute to heritage, was dismantled and placed in storage. The concrete fire pits were smashed. The overbuilt amphitheater turned back into grass. They offered me a consulting role, part-time, honorary. Said I had historical insight and a unique perspective on lake continuity. I declined. Not out of spite. I just didn't want to sit in a room with people who use phrases like lake continuity. My work here was done. My hands had built nothing, but they had held the line. That was enough. Now all I wanted was quiet. And slowly I got it. By autumn, the only sounds were the crunch of leaves, the call of distant loons, the occasional slap of a fish breaching the surface. The trails regrew. The grass overtook the walking paths, once etched in symmetry. My dock, left untouched, stood like an artifact of another age. The old shack, now reinforced, roof patched, windows clear, became my cathedral. I spent hours there just listening. The wind, the creak of branches, the lake whispering things it had never said aloud before, now that the machines were gone. I think what surprised me most wasn't how fast they vanished, but how fast they were forgotten. People stopped talking about sunny shores. The resort that was supposed to redefine lakeside living became a cautionary tale told in whispers at real estate seminars. I heard one investor called it the Titanic of inland development. Others said it never existed at all, that it was a rumor, a failed pitch, a slide deck that went nowhere. But I had the photos, the permits, the fines still pinned in a drawer like old war medals. The land remembers, even if the world forgets. And what of the lake? It returned. Not to what it was, things never go back, but to something older, wilder. The animals came first. A heron I hadn't seen in years landed on the far shore one misty morning and stood for almost an hour, neck craned like it was inspecting the ruins. Then the otters, sleek and silent, slipping through reeds that had regrown in silence. Even the fish seemed bolder. The water, once clouded with gasoline and sunscreen slicks, ran clear again. I could see the bottom now, even near the deeper bends. Some nights I'd paddle out and just drift, let the current do what it would. Stars above, depth below, the balance restored. Neighbors, the few who stayed, changed too. The loudest ones left. The quiet ones remained. People who remembered Ed Whitaker. People who nodded in the grocery store, but never asked what side you were on. We had been here before the HOA. We'd be here long after. Occasionally someone new would show up, looking to buy, always with questions. Is it true what happened here? Do you really own the lake? I'd shrug. Offer a cryptic smile. Let the rumors do their work. Truth doesn't travel fast, but myth flies. One afternoon, a young couple parked at the trailhead, stepped out with matching vests and clipboards, and approached me as I cleared brush. They asked if I'd be interested in participating in a documentary about community development and resistance. They had a drone, a list of questions, a vision. I told them no politely. They asked why. I pointed to the lake. That's your story, I said. And stories like that don't need narration. Just space. They thanked me, left, and as they drove off, I saw them filming from the rear window anyway. That's the thing about stories. They never end where you think they do. They just stop being yours. Now, in the quiet moments, I think of Ed, of his handshake, his warning. Respect the lake and it'll respect you. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a contract. One he honored. One I honored. One they broke. And the lake, as promised, responded in kind. I sit on the dock sometimes, coffee in hand, fishing line lazy in the water, and watch the sun crawl across the surface. No banners. No brass bands. No weddings. Just light and motion and breath. The kind of peace that doesn't ask permission. Some mornings, I think about writing it all down. The whole thing. Names, dates, deeds, betrayals. Turn it into a book. A warning. But then I remember what James said that day we signed the final papers. Sometimes the best revenge is time. And sometimes the best story is silence. I didn't believe him then. But I do now. Because silence is where the lake lives. And that's where I intend to stay. The ruins still exist, if you know where to look. The foundation of the event center, swallowed by vines. The path where golf carts once rolled, now buried in pine needles. You can find remnants of their dreams scattered like bones in the woods. But they don't belong to the lake anymore. They belong to history. And history is a kind of current, always moving forward, always reminding us that ownership isn't about paper or profit. It's about presence. About who stays when everyone else leaves. I stayed. I outlasted them. I watched the world they built collapse under the weight of its own ambition, and I did it not by fighting louder, but by standing still. Some battles are won with fire, others with force. But the most honest victories are won by waiting. Waiting while the storm passes, while the fools run themselves breathless, while the land itself decides what kind of future it wants to bear. And when that moment comes, when the water is calm and the wind carries only truth, you know you've won. Not because you shouted the loudest, but because you're still here. And that is how the lake was saved. Not by a hero, not by a war, but by one man who listened, and waited, and remembered.